Hello aspiring developers, my name is Instructor Georges and I'm thrilled to be taking you through session 5 of the web development cohort. Today we are going to learn about cloning, forking, pulling requests and merging pull requests. We've used the word clone before, so it's not a new term, and both clone and fork are commonly used in VCS, so the version control system. An example is Git, and this is particularly used when working with projects or repositories on platforms like GitHub. So you may want to ask yourself, what is the definition of clone? Cloning a repository, as earlier stated in previous videos, means creating a copy of that entire repository. And when I say entire, I mean the files, the histories, the branches. And so that cloned repository is an exact replication of the original from the original cloned document or repository, and you can work with it locally from your machine. So as earlier stated, we in previous videos, the command is git clone and the URL. So an example of git clone, we are going to use it to clone some repository. Then cloning is typically done when you want to work on a project locally. If you want to contribute to changes or just to explore the code to see what the code has. You also have to remember that cloning creates a connection between that local project in the machine and the remote repository that you're cloning from. So this allows you to fetch updates and also push changes to that online repository. Now let's get to understand about forking. So straight away I've opened my GitHub homepage. Here is my GitHub. This is my personal GitHub page, Georges Roberto, and here I can go to repositories. So you notice that the first repository I have here is Web2, but now I want to fork a repository. So I'm going to fork Java Programmers repositories. Let me just search Java Programmers here. Yeah, so you can notice that this is my GitHub profile, but I'm viewing Java Programmers page. So let me just go to their repositories. So this is Java Programmers repositories that are public, and that's why I can view them using my personal account, which is Georges Roberto. So now I come to this certification repo. This is the one I'm interested in. And now fork, as we said, is creating a personal copy of someone else's repository, so like in GitHub. But we have to acknowledge that the copy that we are forking is entirely independent from the original repository. So this certification repo is the original repository, but we are going to create a new fork. So that's that create fork button. The goodness is you can always rename a forked repo. So you can also change the description. So I'll say this is the first certification project. To demonstrate, I'll leave that description as that, and I'll tap on create fork. So now you notice that this is my GitHub profile and this is my GitHub page. You see that there is this repository called forked repo, and it's coming, or it's being forked from Java Programmers certification repo. So this certification repo is entirely independent from forked repo. So any changes made in forked repo are not synced with the certification repo. So this once we have this forked repository, this now it's like we now own an exact same repository to Java Programmers, and we can now clone it into our machine. So you just type on code clone local, then clone https, and you tap on this copy URL to clipboard. So now let's go and clone this into our local machine using the git bash terminal. Once you have opened the Git bash terminal at your desired location, and I really advise that you have a projects location where all your projects lie, so you don't have a difficult time getting the projects that you have. So now, as you said earlier, the difference between cloning and forking: in cloning, the changes you make can be synced with the one that you have in the URL which is hosted online. But in forking, the forked repository is entirely independent from the forked repository, from where it was forked from. So now here we're going to type in, we're going to copy the URL of the repository we just copied from GitHub. Yeah, so it looks like I deleted it. So it was github.com, JS Roberto, then forked repo. So it's forked repo.git. So now we are cloning the forked repo.git. Okay, so now that we already have it in our local machine, we can cd into that forked repo, the one that we just cloned, and then from here we can type code dot to open it using our default default code editor, which for my case is Visual Studio Code. Now that our Visual Studio Code is opened in our forked repo folder, we are going to add some files into the folder. I'm going to add Roberto.md file. Here is my GitHub username, and I'm going to add a description in that file. I'll say my username is my file name, and add a note there that I am thrilled to learn Git. I'll speak of forking, merging, and pull requests, and I'm going to save that file using Ctrl+S, or you can just simply tap on file and then save. So now I've made changes to my cloned version of the forked repository. So this current folder or repository that I'm working on locally is the one that is independently in my GitHub account. So now let's git add. So you notice the changes of state from change of state from U to A. We already talked about states in the previous video. Then git commit -m. The commit message, I'm going to use my GitHub, my name, and then we're going to git push. So this pushes our changes from our local file to our remote file that we cloned from Janja Programmers. So let's head back to our GitHub website so we can see the changes that have been made there. Yeah, so here is our repository, forked repo. Let's just refresh it, and now you notice that it tells us the branch is one commit ahead of Janja Programmers /certification repo.main. And here you notice that 1 minute ago we added this Georges Roberto.md file with a commit message Georges. So if we open this Georges Roberto.md file, we notice that the one that we edited in our Visual Studio Code locally in our machine is updated to this one that is now online. and we see that the description is here, my username is my file name, and then I'm thrilled to learn git forking, merging, and pull requests. So I tap back to forked repository, and now I want us to learn the difference between a fork and cloning, since we already know what cloning is, and we have already seen that the cloned repository is in sync with the online version from where it was cloned from. But now this is the forked repository of the certification repo. So now let's go to the certification repo in janzaprogrammers.com and see whether we have this georgesroberto.md change. So now here in our Janja Programmers page where we forked our certification repo from, when we refresh, let's just refresh, we notice that there is no new change here. Actually, there are only two files, which is Cloud Brilliant and readme.md. But now the file that we just created, Georges Roberto, is not here even if we refresh. But in the cloned repository, once we refresh from our page, it already updates that hosted repository with our file. So this tells us that cloned repositories are in sync and are synergized or linked to the local repository. But for forked repository, they are independent and do not affect the repository where they are forked from, in this case Janja Programmers. So now let's head back to our personal GitHub account. This is Janja Programmers, the account where we forked from. So let's head back to our personal account, which is Georges Roberto, and we see how we can connect that change that we made from the forked repository such that it merges or we contribute to this repository. So let's head back to the Georges repository. So as we open now our personal, or rather my personal GitHub page, Georges Roberto, you notice that the forked repo from Janja Programmers, when you look at here, it tells us that the branch is one commit ahead of Janja Programmers certification repo.main. So we can either sync fork or tap on this one commit ahead. You sync fork when you are below, one commit behind, but if you are one commit ahead, you tap on that commit message, and then it brings you to this comparing changes page. So now here we are comparing between the Janja certification repo, and we are comparing it to which is the main or the base repository, and we are comparing it to the forked repository, Georges forked repo, which is also the main branch of this repository. So now we want to discuss and review the changes in comparison with the others. So hence we are going to create a pull request, and we are going to name this pull request. Let's give it the name request. It's a pull request, so request to contribute, and our description here will be detailed instruction, or rather detailed changes on what we've done. So we just added a new file. The file name will be specified when we create the pull request. You can also say we wrote a brief intro about myself. So let me write in first person pronoun. Added a new file, then I wrote a brief intro about myself. So now I type on create pull request. So now these are requests to contribute to. The request to contribute is our title. Here you can see this is our username, Georges Roberto. Then the message that we commented on. That this commented message is extremely important to help the owners of that repository which we forked to understand what we are trying to add into the main code base that we forked from. So now let's head back to the main branch, or rather Janja programmers page, to see what happens when a pull request is created. So now back to Janja programmers page. When we refresh this browser, we notice that there is a pull request up here. This has turned to 1. So when we tap on this pull requests, we see that the message is request to contribute. This is the title of the pull request. So when I tap on that, I see that there's this person who I don't know of. The name is Georges Roberto. He added a new file, and in the file he wrote a brief intro about himself. Okay, so by default GitHub checks for conflicts between the base branch, which is the main branch of Janja programmers, this one here, and if the branch has no conflicts, then merging can be performed automatically, as you can read from here. So you can either squash and merge, or you can rebase and merge, or you can just create a merge commit. So you tap on merge pull request to create a merge commit. Let's tap on it. So you'll be prompted to write a message of a commit message of the pull of the merging that you are now performing, and then you click on confirm merge. So now here you see the button, or rather that let me call it, yeah, that button changes from green to purple, and now it says it's merged. So now let's go back to our code, and yeah, you now realize that Georges Roberto has been added to this Janja programmers page. Georges Roberto.md file is already in the repo, exactly as it was written by our personal account, which was Georges Roberto. So now let's just tap back to certification repo, and let's go back to Georges Roberto personal account and see what happens once pull request has been successfully merged by the admin of the repository that we just forked from. And voila, you realize that the request to contribute pull request has been merged when you are back in your GitHub personal page. So you notice that your request has been merged, and you see that Janja programmers merged one commit into their base repository, or their main repository where their code base is, and that was done from georgesroberto.main 2 minutes ago. So let's come to code, and we can see that there's a commit message here saying merge pull request, and when you hover there, you're going to see that there was a merge pull request, and the merge pull request ID, which is #6 from Georges Roberto main, and the message was request to contribute. So you also see below it that Janja programmers committed 2 minutes ago. So the commit message of Janja programmers was acceptance of this pull request that we had sent as Georges Roberto. Yeah, so now when you refresh this page, you realize that it is still working. We still have Georges Roberto file there. This is exactly what we were supposed to see. We're supposed to see that we are one commit behind. So you just tap on sync fork and you update branch. So you can read here that update branch to keep this branch up to date by syncing one commit from the upstream repository. So the upstream repository is the Janja programmers certification repo.main. That is the upstream repository, or the repository that we had earlier forked from. So let's update the branch. You can always compare to see the change that has been made, which is different from what you had already done. So here we see that the branch is now up to date with the base repository, or the upstream repository, and the message here is now Janja programmers merged pull requests, the one that we were reading a few minutes ago, but I didn't notice we were reading it from the Janza page. So we realized that we can read that from our own personal account. And once that is done, you can see here the number of forks of the repository, and currently there are 8 forks in that repository. So you can just tap on this to go back to the Janza programmers page that we forked from. And now you also realize here that I'm really trying to see if we can, okay, we can't view the people who forked, but we realize that this forked repo is now up to date with the Georges Roberto repository. And so that's it about forking. Cloning is just a recap. So that's it about forking a repository, how to clone the forked repository, just done the same way as how we were cloning before, how to make changes to that cloned repository and pushing it back to the hosted repository on your GitHub page, how to create a pull request so that you can request to input your new or newest changes into the main code base, which is the repository you copied from, or rather you forked from. So a pull request, as we can explain it as a feature used in distributed version control system. This way we can say that a pull request, we can use the short form of PR. This is a way to propose change from one branch or fork of a repository to another. So our PR or pull request was a request to Janza programmers, the ones that we forked from. We were requesting them to update their code with our changes. So we've already seen that and we've already understood that. So now let's describe the changes. Always when you push, or rather always when you send a pull request to a forked repository, make sure you describe the change that that you've made there. So when you submit that pull request, it should be detailed with a title, a very short title, and a long description saying, touching on the major changes you've made on a specific file. Yeah, so basically pull requests are a crucial collaboration tool in open source projects and team-based development workflows, because this facilitates the structured, it also facilitates the transparent process for proposing and reviewing and even incorporating changes into a code base, because the changes we've just made are different from the changes that Cloud Brilliant, as you saw, made in the Janza programmers repository. But that is an example of how to collaboratively work on GitHub. So I can see that I have 100 message, and that is the edited push path. So I've already read this, and then request to contribute, this was also read. Yeah, so that's it for today's video. I hope you are now well versed with basic Git commands, how to branch, how to pull, how to switch between branches, how to create branches, how to delete branches. Yeah, and I also hope you can now push and pull between cloned repositories and forked repositories. Pulling between cloned repositories is just as easy as git pull, maybe the origin, and you specify maybe the branch from which you're pulling from, and git pull and pulling from a forked repository, then that is called a PR or a pull request. And when that is certified or reviewed, then the repository that you forked from, the administrator of that repository, or rather the owner or the author of that repository, will go through your files, and if they notice no conflicts, then they'll add you, or rather they'll merge your changes into the main code base. So that's it for today's video. I'm glad that you've reached the end of week 1 of this cohort. We look forward to an amazing web development course, and we're going to dive deep into front-end web development. You surely don't want to miss what is set for you for the beginning of the web development that you have been really waiting for. In case of any issues, please feel free to reach out. And in case you've enjoyed these sessions, also leave a thumbs up. You can share, you can like, and you can subscribe. And that's how to buy a coffee for the instructors who have dedicated their time to present this information unto you. Thank you and happy coding week.